We are in the book of Revelation. It's interesting that we are now, for at least a short period of time, on Sunday mornings, going to be in Matthew chapter 24, as we're looking at the book of Revelation on Sunday evenings. Matthew 24 is known by some as the Little Apocalypse, which of course means that the book of Revelation is the big apocalypse. Both of them are big. Both of them are dealing with end times, and they both go together. If you're going to study eschatology seriously, you have to look at both of those texts. So this morning, Jesus said that he told his disciples, and through them us, that we will hear of wars and rumors of war, and that we're not to be concerned about that. These things must happen. Well, let's go back to that phrase for just a moment. We didn't really have time to camp on it this morning. So he's speaking about war and the threat of war, and he says that these things, we shouldn't be concerned, that these things must happen. Is Jesus endorsing war? Okay, I don't think so either, because Jesus never endorsed any kind of violence. Although when he comes back, there will be victory. We see in chapter 19, even at the end of chapter 14, that there will be some violence involved in that. But, yes, sir. He did, but we wouldn't compare that to war. But yeah, he got a little cranky at least. So we don't think that Jesus is endorsing war necessarily. The Bible says that there's coming a time when war will cease, wars will cease, and that's the goal. Nevertheless, we have this period of time where there is war. Jesus says not to be concerned about it. What does he mean by that? That we should make no effort to avoid war?
Maybe we should bring our parents and worry about being taken care of.
Okay, Serena says we should wring our hands and worry about being taken care of. I think that's a better solution than saying that we shouldn't try to avoid wars. I believe that the Lord would endorse our efforts at avoiding that kind of national violence. Jack?
Well, I would say that in a nuclear age, war really has a grand defeat, puts people in the end of life, end of the species because of war.
Okay, Jack points out that right now, for our entire lives, most of us, war has been something that is a specter of the end of life on planet Earth, the end of the species. I mean, you can see by the movies that came out after the atom bomb and the H bomb, the apocalyptic notion that we could literally wipe out most life on planet Earth, the nuclear winters and all of that that we've seen. So there is a new level of anxiety about war since the Second World War, certainly. Paul?
I'm still stuck on this Jesus endorsed war, which, I mean, I'm certainly not comfortable with saying I understand the motives, but God is in control of war and everything.
So we're back to one of those situations where we would say, Paul is saying, he's going back to the question of does God or Jesus endorse war, and he's reminding us that God is in control. And so that we have to at least admit that God is allowing these things to happen.
Well, these things must take place.
That was going to be my ultimate question. So Paul is pushing me forward here. I'm just lazily walking down the sidewalk, trying to pull in everything I can. He's like, let's get on with this. Yeah. So the question is, why is war necessary? Why does he say that it is necessary for these things to happen? Wars and rumors of war.
Why was it necessary for John to baptize?
Why was it necessary for John to baptize?
These things must be fulfilled.
To fulfill all righteousness in that particular case.
Right.
So it's a little bit different, but there's still that sense of imperative. Yes, these things must happen. But what would be the imperative to war? What is accomplished by war, Jack?
I would say it's, the sinfulness of man would be the first definition of why there's war. Remember, the Satan is the prince of the power of the air. He has a lot of control over the hearts of men on earth. And war comes from sinfulness.
Okay, so Jack is reminding us of the sinfulness of man, which ultimately drives war, and that Satan is involved too, who I'm pretty sure would be pro-war. So that would give us causes, but it still doesn't answer the question of reason.
All with the Old Testament, to the Canaanites and to the Jews themselves when they fell away. I mean, part of Christ, part of God.
Okay, so Paul is reminding us that in the Old Testament, with the Canaanites, for instance, that war which God unleashed on them through the Israelites was a judgment against their nation. Somebody over here says something. Sometimes war is good against evil. Okay, I would agree with that. Helen's saying that war is an expression, albeit a violent one, of the conflict between good and evil. Morris?
But isn't it God's plan from the beginning? Well, maybe not, it was the beginning. War is, I mean, he commanded them to go and take the land. And from that point on, leads up to the greatest wars. So war has been, I mean, Israel fights wars every day almost, and fight enemies. So war is just almost part of the Bible.
It really is. Maurice is saying that the war was just part of the plan, almost from the beginning, and that God used war as a tool to give the promised land to Jews, and simultaneously to judge the Canaanites. So he was accomplished two things at the same time. He was fulfilling his promise to give the promised land to the Jews, and he was punishing the Canaanites because their sin had filled up, the bowl of God's wrath had filled up. It was time to pour it out. Who had their hand up, Jack?
Well, I was just going to say too, that it's also, the purpose of war in that case was for glory to be brought to the God. Other nations would see the God of Israel was God.
Okay, the purpose of war is for glory to be brought to God. That's assuming that Israel is in the right. But it turned out that Israel was idolatrous, and so God turned war against them, at least in many occasions, in the book of Judges over and over again. But the cataclysm with Nebuchadnezzar, and the one that we're looking at in the mornings is coming up in AD 70 when the temple will be destroyed. Jordan?
Then why are we wondering about this? Because Jesus already won the war.
Jesus already what?
He already won the battle. The battle's already done.
Well, the battle is already won, and when we get to Revelation chapter 19, we'll see what that looks like. But we still have this statement without any explanation that wars are necessary, that we shouldn't be worried about them. And I think Sabrina's right. It's not that we shouldn't try to avoid war or avoid all kinds of violence. It's that we should recognize the fact that in this age, violence and war is part of the life, and that God's still in control, and so we don't have to live in fear, even though these things are out there, that we can live in faith and confidence. I'm not sure we can actually answer this question. Here's a supposition. This is not, I don't think, in the Bible necessarily, but just thinking about it, it is true that war tends to reveal in its ugliest and to its fullest the sinfulness of humanity. In many ways, there's nothing more ugly than war. All the horrible, terrible things that you can think about that human beings do to one another tend to happen in a lot when war is unleashed between two peoples or more. But as I thought about this, it also dawned on me that in all this melee of madness and sinfulness and violence and wickedness and darkness of war, what else happens? Good is revealed too. It is. There are incredible acts of heroism and selflessness and that take place that punctuate war with these shafts of light. And so we recognize this. I don't think anybody in their right mind would descend into war just to see these shafts of heroic light. And I suspect that most mentally sane and balanced people who have been to war and who were marked out as heroes would say that wasn't worth it. I wouldn't want to go to war simply to be a hero or to see someone else be a hero. But it is true that war reveals both the ugliness and the potential goodness in humanity both at the same time. And it's also true that sinfulness reveals, I see you, Kevin, reveals both the ugliness of humanity and the beauty of God's redemption at the same time. I've often asked myself this question: how would we experience the redemption of God if nobody were ever lost? Now, we could say the same thing about that we said about war. We could say it's not worth it. It's not worth seeing people get lost simply to reveal the wonder of God's redemption. That if this line of reasoning is correct, God apparently thinks so. And I'm not sure how else we would ever understand God's redemption. Let me stop and let Kevin make his point.
Well, you've moved on. I mean, I'm going to pull you back. So.
Okay, that's fine. You're not going to pull me back?
Well, I don't mind.
I'm used to getting pulled around, you know.
I don't want to get you off but, you know, war is a reflection also. You know, Paul, not this Paul, but the other Paul, talks about, you know, the warfare that we are engaged in every day. And it's a reflection of a spiritual reality.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And, you know, maybe something the enemy has twisted, but something that is true. It always has been true. Nonetheless, you know, we fight with spiritual weapons, but we should be at war all the time.
Yes, spiritual war is, in many ways, it's the real war. And the war that looks real to us is the one that is the reflection of the reality, just like a lot of other spiritual truths. But imagine for just a moment, let's do a thought experiment. Let's go back to the Garden of Eden for just a moment, if we can. Now, this is very, very difficult for us to do. Keep your clothes on, all right? We're not going to get crazy here. It's very, very difficult for us to go back to the Garden of Eden because we've already tasted of evil. But let's just try for a moment. Imagine that we're adults and we're back in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve, and we never experienced evil. No one has ever told us a lie. No one has ever stolen anything from us. We don't even understand the concept of murder or somebody taking a life or committing adultery or any of those things. That our minds and our experience is completely free of all of that. Now, to the best of our ability, if we can place ourselves in that circumstance, what would happen if God were to come to us and try through language to reveal to us through His Word the goodness of His redemption and His attributes as Savior? Would any of that make sense to us?
No.
It wouldn't. There is a sense in which, and I'm uncomfortable with this, I admit it, but there's a sense in which we have to go out into the world and be wounded to find out what it means to be healed. Yes, sir.
If you want to explore that, concept was to read C.S. Lewis's Space Trilogy. I think the book is called Pelandra.
Yeah.
And it's another planet that never failed.
Oh,
And humans go there.
okay.
And hilarity doesn't on it soon. But it's really eye-opening to exactly what you're talking about. This is a whole planet of beings that have never experienced.
Well, that's fascinating, especially from someone as creative as C.S. Lewis. So Paul is telling us that C.S. Lewis wrote a trilogy, a space trilogy, and one of the books was about a planet where he supposes the fall never took place, and he plays that out. That would be interesting, because that's essentially what we're talking about here. What was the conclusion that he drew from that?
Read it, yes.
The man named Ransom fought with evil and right.
Okay, so there ends up being a battle between good and evil, even though there wasn't a fall. Okay. Now,
Really deep in the
I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued. Well, the idea that God's redemptive purposes are revealed through our suffering is a notion that's easy to talk about. It's difficult to live. And really, it's on almost every page of our Bible. The book of Genesis climaxes with Joseph telling his brothers, "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good." And we're looking at the end of the Bible, the book of Revelation, and it's just making this point over and over again, that God's redemptive purposes are fulfilled through the suffering that goes on. There are some Christians who are able to embrace this fully and to even, I choose my words carefully here, look forward to martyrdom. There were some martyrs in the early centuries of the church where they considered it an honor to be able to die for the gospel. Yeah, I don't think I've grown to that point. Yeah, I'll keep working on it. But I'm not ready to rush down and die. They weren't either. They had found themselves in a circumstance where they had two choices. They could either renounce Jesus or die for Jesus. And they chose the latter. That's what haunts me. If I were put into that position where my life was being dangled before my eyes, and the only way that I could keep it would be to renounce my Lord, what would I do? I would love to just stand up here with great confidence and say, "Oh, I would die for the Lord." But the fact is, none of us know what we'll do until we get into that circumstance.
The dying grace.
Yeah, well, it would take a lot of grace, definitely, to do that. So these are subjects that pop up throughout Scripture, and that question or the statement that Jesus made this morning made me think about it a lot this week as I was studying that text. This is one of those weeks where an ability that I have worked on for years and years really served me well. I learned how to do this way back in the 90s. You know, it's wild that the 90s are way back now, but they aren't. But way back in the 90s, Karen and I were living in Denton, and I was going to seminary in Fort Worth, south of downtown Fort Worth, which is where I was this week. And we were working on a church plant in north of Richland Hills. And you may not know where all those places are, but they're not close together, and there's a lot of traffic between all of them in this particular area, the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And so I was spending endless hours driving the car, and I was engaged in activities that required a lot of reading and study. Well, I thought for a little while about reading while I drove and decided that wouldn't be good. Okay, you know, that sounded too dangerous. And I won't tell you that I tried it, so we'll move on. But what I did decide was that if I worked really hard on learning to memorize things quickly, that I could study while I was in the car driving, that I could think about texts and put together sermons, outlines, pray. I think it's easy to pray with your car. Now, you don't want to close your eyes when you do that either, but you can pray up a storm while you're in your car driving. The next time you go to Little Rock, if you listen to the radio in your car, I challenge you to drive all the way to Little Rock and all the way back and never turn your radio on, or your phone or anything else. It's amazing the time that you get alone to think and to study. So anyway, this week I got a chance to do that again, driving to Fort Worth and back. And I won't share much about this because I know I shouldn't. I could tell after the first lecture that I went to Thursday morning, my dad went with me. And we went to the lecture, and when the lecture was over, he had this look on his face like, why did you want to hear that, and why am I here? You know, but it really was, it was fascinating. This was a guy who is a Christian linguist, and he's a president of a seminary in Canada. His name's Stanley Porter. And here's a dialogue between a brilliant Christian linguist and the people who write the commentaries that we read to help us understand the Bible. And he was kind of upbraiding and rebuking them and letting them know that a lot of the commentary writers right now are way behind what's happening in the study of language, and he's trying to get them to catch up. And you might be thinking, well, what difference does that make? I want to give you an example that I hope will be very practical for you from the Bible. Who knows what the Greek word for church is in the Bible?
Ecclesia.
Koinonia is fellowship, but there's another. Who said that? Very good, Blake. Ecclesia is the word for church. Koinonia is the word that's used for fellowship. So it's a good answer. But ecclesia is the word for church. Now, what typically has happened for a long time in biblical studies is that a lot of energy has been placed on individual words. And ecclesia is a great example of this. Almost everybody in here, if you've listened to Christian teachers and preachers for very long, you've heard what I'm about to say. That ecclesia is a compound word made up of the word ek, which is a preposition which means out of or out from, and klesia, which means called. And so this word means the called out ones. When you think about the church, that it is the called out ones, which may be true way back in the history of the word, long before the New Testament came along. And the mistake that's made, the fallacy here, is that every time the word ecclesia appears in the New Testament, which is about 114 times, this type of teacher will stop and go through this whole history of the word, ecclesia, out from, called ones, the churches, the called out ones, were called out from the world, and they can go on. That preach, okay? I can preach on that for a while. You know, we're called out of the world, we're to be different, we're to be distinctive. And so this big truckload of theology is loaded into this word based on its history, and every 114 times that that word shows up, the truck backs up and all the theology is dumped out on the dock of the Bible study. And what this linguist, Porter, was saying is that that's a fallacy because the full weight of a term theologically doesn't necessarily come to bear every time that it's used. Some of these words just become technical terms, and all of that history isn't there every time that they're mentioned. For instance, the first time that this word occurs in Matthew 16 is when when Peter confesses Jesus as the Christ. Remember what did Jesus say back to Peter at that point? Yes, the first time ecclesia occurs. You're Peter, and I'll tell you that on this Petra I will build my church, and what? And the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Now, just real quickly, first response. What's the emphasis in that little phrase right there that Jesus just gave us? On this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Gates of Hades, will not prevail against it. there's such emphasis here about the rock, and of course we can ask questions about is that Peter, is it his confession, whatever, but there's some emphasis there. What else?
The
What is
church.
it we're supposed to get out of that sentence?
The church.
The church wins, absolutely. The church will be victorious. Jesus is going to build it. He's going to build it on a rock, and that rock will never be moved. It's going to win. When you're in the church, you're in an organization that will be there till the end. We see now 2,000 years later that he was right, but there's another 2,000 years, people will still be meeting together in koinonia at the ecclesia. Now, what happens here with the wrong type of Bible study is we bring this word ecclesia, and we bring the 18-wheeler of theology that we've built up in that word, and we dump it into this sentence, and what happens? We miss the points of what was going on. Because we've over-theologized a single word instead of looking at the sentence and asking ourselves, what was Jesus telling us about the church? Was he telling us about the history of the meaning of the term ecclesia? Or is he telling us about the future of the organization that he's building? Obviously the latter. And so this is just one example. And since I'm talking about ecclesia, it's a compound word. Here's another example. The fact that it means called out literally may not even be an issue by the first century. Compound words are fun. You know, in English, think of some compound words in English. Butterfly is a compound word, right? It's made up of butter and fly. Now, if I got up here and taught you that what that word really means is that margarine is going to go soaring through the air, you would think I was nuts, and you would be right. Or if I said, what about the word honeymoon? You know, that means that when we get to the moon, we're going to find bees up there, you know. Obviously not. Sometimes when you put compound words together, new things come out that really have nothing to do with the individual parts at all. So that's another fallacy. Here's an exciting thing that is happening in the world of biblical studies. And if you love grammar, you need to come and talk to me on the side because I'll give you more detail. But here's an exciting thing that's happening in linguistics and in Bible study is that it's moving beyond these word-centric studies and recognizing the fact that the Bible gives us, words really have no meaning until there was.
In a sense.
Well, yeah, in a sense or in a context. You know, until you put a word in a context, it's just an abstract symbol that has really no meaning at all by itself. Now, you can have one word that has a meaning. I could write on a piece of paper the word stop, S-T-O-P, and show it to you, and it would mean nothing until I did something with it. If you and I were driving down the street and you got distracted, and we're looking over here because you were wanting to turn left, and I suddenly said, stop! That one word suddenly has a context and has a meaning to it. You know, we start putting the word into a context and it has meaning. If you're dating someone that you've fallen in love with and they look you in the eyes and said, I think we should stop seeing each other, boom. You know, you don't care about the meaning of the symbol S-T-O-P at that point. What do you care about? You care about you care about the big picture that's going on here. If you have a child that has struggled with drugs and alcohol for years and years, and you never could even get them to admit that they have a problem, they come to you and say, Mom, I've decided to stop drinking and using drugs. Do you care about the meaning of stop at that point? No, there's a bigger context going on here. And to sit down and start talking about the etymology of the term stop would be ridiculous. And unfortunately, that's kind of what has happened in a lot of our Bible commentaries. That and some other things. And so I want to encourage you in your own Bible study to look at larger pieces of Scripture. Larger pieces of Scripture. Not even just sentences, but paragraphs. A lot of our Bibles are paragraphs. Now, that wasn't originally put there. Those are things that have been decided by editors since then. But they're usually reasonable. And if you begin studying your Bible by looking at the whole paragraph, I'll give you an example. For those of you who are studious and diligent and like doing this sort of thing, try this exercise. Read a paragraph and then try to write a complete sentence that tells what that paragraph says. Now, I know that sounds like we're back in English in 11th grade. But it really is a good mental exercise to study the Bible. All right, I'm going to stop now, or I may not get fed when I get home later on. We're in chapter 14, the Apocalypse is known. Just read these first few verses. We've already talked about them. And I saw and looked, the Lamb was standing on the Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his name and the name of his Father written on their foreheads. Now, if we remove the number 14 and let the text flow, discourse flow here, we've talked about this already. What we have is the contrast between those who took the mark of the beast at the end of chapter 13 and these who got the sign or the seal of God on them. Verse 2, and I heard a sound or voice, phone can go either way, from heaven, like the sound of many waters, and like the sound of great thunder. And the sound which I heard was like stringed instrument players playing their stringed instruments. Your Bible might say harp. That's really kind of a modern word. Verse 3, and they sing a new song before the throne, before the four living beings and the elders. And no one was able to learn this song except the 144,000, those purchased from the earth. Now, let's keep going. Verse 4. These are those who with women have not defiled themselves, for they are virgins. And they follow the Lamb wherever he goes. Those purchased from men, first fruit to God and to the Lamb, and in their mouth is not found any falsehood. They are blameless. Now, that's where we stopped in verse 4 last time. Verses 4 and 5, fascinating. You have to kind of choose, when you're looking at the book of Revelation, how you're going to see these 144,000. A lot of people see the 144,000 as a symbol of the entire church. Others see them as a literal 144,000 ethnic Jews who lived during the Great Tribulation. And I'll be humble because everybody tries hard and works hard to get this right. I think those who see them as the church are wrong, but I'll be respectful of the work that they're doing. I think that what we have here, that there's enough indications to say that this is a real 144,000 group of ethnic Jews. That being the case, when it says here that they are virgins, it probably means what? That they're virgins. You know, they're single. That they live their lives choosing to focus entirely on the work of the Lord, as we read about in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, and as Jesus even mentioned. Now, if we were to take the 144,000 as being symbolic of the entire church, then we might think that the idea of them being virgins means what? What's that, Lisa?
New converts.
Try again.
New converts.
New converts? That's an interesting idea. Probably not, but good try.
What was your question?
If the 144,000 are representative of the entire church, what does it mean that they're all virgins? Pure, clean. Virginity is a symbolic of purity and so forth. Now, is this being derogatory toward marriage? Absolutely not. I mean, the New Testament would be at odds with itself if it's saying that that marriage is somehow defiles people. We know that that's not the case. Jesus and the writers of the New Testament and the Old Testament all had a high view of marriage. But they also used sexual relationship as a symbol for what? Adultery as a relationship for sin. And faithfulness as a symbol for our relationship with God. In the Old Testament, Israel was seen as a wife of God. In the New Testament, Christ and the church are seen as bridegroom and bride. And so sexuality is meant to express a spiritual faithfulness. That's why it's so important for us as Christians those of us who are married, to be faithful to our spouses. It's not just about our spouse. It's about our Lord. And it's about it's about us living in a way that represents Him well. And for those of us who are single, who are Christians, then we want to remain celibate for the very same reason. Because we're reflecting that purity and that faithfulness to God. So, back to the United Methodists from this morning. I can't get enough of that. That was shouting time for me. It really was, because very few things in our country right now are going the way that the Bible says that they should. And so when occasionally something happens good like that, we need to get the palm branches out, and go marching down the street and praising the Lord. Because that was a big thing. Now, I understand it's not over, because the other side's not going to give up. But a clear statement was made. And the statement was that if you give people the Bible and let them read the Bible for themselves and understand it for themselves, they end up recognizing the fact that adultery is wrong and same-sex relationships are wrong and fornication is wrong, even though we don't use that word anymore. Okay? And so we have all these Africans and Asians who, here's the Bible, it's the Word from God. It says these things are wrong. Well, that's the way we're going to live our lives. They give their lives to Christ. And then suddenly, a few generations later, the descendants of the missionaries who came and gave them the Bible are doing what? Going crazy. Going crazy. And, of course, the press is going to follow after them and make it sound like that they have to be very, very careful. This is, I can't help it, politics get involved, and that's not. Somebody has pointed out that what the United Methodist Church is doing is treating the African church and the Asian church, people of color, and they're treating them as spiritual colonialists. Now, if you follow politics at all, you recognize that's a huge slap in the face for the liberal white church in America. They're still telling the people of color how to think, what to think, and how to do church. And in this particular case, the people of color have stood up and said, "You're wrong, and we're not going to do what you're telling us to do." But let me say one thing, because I know that many of you are dealing with people who are defending LGBT from the Bible. And one of the arguments that is, once again, come to my attention, and so I'm assuming that you run into it, is the idea that in the Old Testament there are laws that we no longer follow. Ergo, we should no longer worry about following the laws about human sexuality. Well, that's a fallacy, okay? It's usually packaged like this. Somebody says, well, the Old Testament says that you're not supposed to use 2 different kinds of material in your shirt. The Old Testament says you're not supposed to plant 2 different kinds of crops in your fields. So, when the Old Testament says that 2 men can't sleep together like a man and a woman, why do you follow that and not follow those? Now, what would you say to somebody who defends LGBT with that kind of argument? Chris?
I'll step into the draft.
Okay. And I'll close it.
The Bible doesn't say that planting 2 different crops in one field is a blasphemy to God.
Got it.
That would be my report.
All right, not bad. Anybody else? See, I didn't hurt him. Karen?
Well, the church is the bride of Christ.
Okay, Karen says the church is the bride of Christ, and then she does this, which means you take it from me. And again, if I'm going to be fed when I get out of here, I will take it from you. Yeah, absolutely. I like to eat. That's true, but let me finish what her thought. The church is the bride of Christ, and so our sexual relationships, they are important to a greater degree than the clothes that we wear or the crops that we plant. Okay? Now, we've run into this recently with Jesus. Jesus was asked about divorce in the book of Matthew, and he said, yes, you can divorce, but there is a weightier matter involved, and it is God's plan for marriage. And so one is more important than the other. And more recently, when he was lambasting the Pharisees in chapter 23, he said, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, you tithe on your mint, dill, and cumin, but you forget the what? The weightier matters of the law, which he said at that point were justice, mercy, and faith. So there are weightier matters in the law, and one of the things that I would say is that there are explanations and reasons for the changes in the dietary laws and so forth. But let's just set all that aside for a moment. Are you telling me, Mr. or Mrs. LGBT, are you telling me that you don't think your sexual relationships are any more important than the clothes you wear? Because if that's what you believe, you have no discernment spiritually at all. None whatsoever. Okay? Somebody else.
Well, the New Testament talks about sexual relationships. It does talk about it. It's backed up in the New Testament shows for
Absolutely. So,
fulfillment of the Old Testament.
yeah, and what Kevin's saying is important because we have a trajectory here. We have in Leviticus, we have texts that say same-sex relationships are an abomination to the Lord. And in Romans chapter 1 and in other passages, we have texts that affirm that same idea. And so what we have here is a trajectory of over 1,000 years where God's concept of human sexuality is unchanged. It's not evolved. Okay? The idea of sacrifices evolved, obviously, because Jesus became the final sacrifice. A lot changed when it comes to sacrifices, but it didn't change when it comes to murder. It didn't change when it comes to lying. It didn't change when it comes to adultery. And it didn't change when it comes to same-sex relationships.
I kind of keep going back to what Chris said. I mean, I truly believe that there are degrees of sin. And there aren't many sins that God refers to as an abomination, which he does on the face out. There's a few other, audience and stuff like that, those are pretty big ones too. But I just think the degree.
And that's biblical. And LGBT people will say that there are all sins are sin, and sin is a sin, and that's on some level that's true. But Corinthians also says that sexual sin is a sin that is against our body. And it's in some ways inside us. All other sins are not on the outside. In that particular passage isolates sexual sins from all other sins. Absolutely. There's only a few fleas in the Bible. Idolatry is one of them, and sexual sin is one of them as well, okay?
Well, and sexual sins, they destroy, it doesn't matter about what we wear and stuff, but that sexual sin rips the cloth more, and it tears up, it affects so many lives, and it hurts so many people, and it hurts the church.
We're seeing that
Well, and
today.
to me, one that the thought that always comes up is, to me, the first commandment is be fruitful and multiply. You cannot be fruitful and multiply if you're not made with a different, of the opposite sex.
Got it. I see I've got you stirred up. Yeah.
I won't repeat what this deacon said.
I know Tim, and when he says something private, I realize it's supposed to be kept private. Yeah, Amy?
The biggest problem that I see, and it's permeating our culture in a lot of ways, and it's not just this, but it's a lot of it. It's primarily this, but it's kind of got its tendrils everywhere, and that's willful sin.
Mm-hmm.
It's a choice to shake a fist at God and say, your word doesn't matter, and we're going to decide.
Well, it is, it's expressed well in pop culture by performers. I don't know who it was, Lady Gaga or somebody said, this is the way I was made, and so this is the way that I have to be, which is a philosophy, which means what is should be. But none of us live life with that philosophy.
We watched this nun sing that song the other day.
Things get stranger all the time, don't they? Yes, Kathleen?
Another thing is that once you let the fire get out of the fireplace, it doesn't just stop with that one thing. I mean, right now, they're saying that it's all the initials and plus, because they know they're gonna add something else to it.
Absolutely. Yeah, Kathleen says, once the fire's out of the fireplace, you can't stop it. It'll burn the house down.
I mean, it's started with just,
There's some kind of double entendre going on here. I'm not sure what it is. Yeah.
and now, it's transgender, and then, like I say, it's gonna.
We're not done
it's
yet.
gonna stop.
I'm afraid we're not, no. And I don't even want to talk about what the next thing is. There's- Right. But now we're back to where we started, aren't we?
Let's stay there.
We're back to where we started, that says God has allowed evil to exist to reveal his redemptive character. And so that would be one way that we need to come back to this community and say, look, just because this thing exists doesn't mean that it's good. Satan exists and he is not good. All right, gentlemen who are going to serve, come on up. Let's shift gears here. We're thinking about purity, sexual purity, spiritual purity, faithfulness to the Lord. Jesus is the bridegroom of the church. We collectively are the bride, and he laid down his life to save us and to reveal God's redemptive purposes in our lives.